When most people hear the word Sparta, one image immediately comes to mind. Strong, terrifying warriors wearing crimson-red cloaks standing on a mountain pass as they shout the famous line,
"This is Sparta!"
Thanks to Hollywood, the Spartans have become the eternal symbol of unstoppable warriors, fearless, disciplined, bred for war. But the truth is far more complicated. The real Spartans did not live in a world of slow-motion battle scenes and neatly sculpted abs. They lived in a society that was as strange as it was terrifying, a city-state that raised its children in hardship, that demanded obedience to the state above all else, and that thrived on conquest and fear. Their strength came not just from their famous discipline, but from the oppression of others, the myths that justified their way of life, and the iron will to bend every aspect of existence toward survival. To their allies, they were guardians of Greece. To their enemies, they were monsters. And to later generations, they became legends, remembered not as ordinary mortals, but as something greater. Men descended from Heracles, chosen by Apollo, favored by Ares, and willing to sacrifice everything for their city. Yet the true story of Sparta is not simply about glorious battles or legendary last stands. It is about the foundations of their society, the myths that gave them purpose, the harsh reality of their daily lives, their brief moment of dominance, and their inevitable downfall. This is the story of the Spartans, not the fantasy, not the Hollywood myth, but the truth that lies behind it. Long before Sparta became the iron-fisted warrior state that we know today, it was simply a small cluster of villages resting in the fertile valley of the Eurotas River, deep within the rugged land of Laconia. Surrounded by mountains on three sides and open only to the sea, it was a land both isolated and protected, the perfect cradle for a society that would grow into something unique. History tells us that Sparta emerged after the so-called Dorian invasion, when waves of northern tribes swept into the Peloponnese around the end of the Bronze Age. These newcomers conquered, mingled, and eventually established what would become one of Greece's most formidable polis. Unlike the bustling trade ports of Corinth or the cultural heart of Athens, Sparta was shaped by its geography. The valley was defensible, the land rich in grain and olives, and the surrounding mountains gave them natural walls. It was a place where survival could be secured, and that security allowed for something else, the cultivation of a warrior class unlike any other. But the Spartans did not see themselves simply as products of conquest and geography. According to their own myths, they were born from divine bloodlines. Their kings claimed descent from Heracles, the greatest hero of Greek myth, whose strength and trials embodied everything they believed in. In fact, they had not one king, but two, a peculiar system of dual kingship said to trace back and mirror Heracles and his twin brother Iphicles. This made Spartan rulers not mere politicians, but men who carried the blood of gods in their veins. The Spartans also revered the Dioscuri, Castor, and Pollux, twin brothers who were said to protect their warriors in battle. To them, Sparta was not just another Greek city, it was a chosen people, a land touched by the divine. Even the laws that governed their society were said to come from the oracle of Apollo at Delphi. The Great Retra, the founding constitution of Sparta, was not the work of mere men, but of gods speaking through their priestess. From the very beginning, Sparta saw itself as a people apart, a people destined. And this belief in divine ancestry would feed directly into the harsh system they built, a system that would elevate them to greatness and eventually drag them into ruin. The Spartans are remembered as warriors, but their entire society was born from conquest and from the need to keep what they had taken. In the 8th century BCE, the people of Sparta turned their eyes westward, across the Taygetus Mountains, toward the fertile plains of Messenia. These lands were rich in grain, far more fertile than Laconia's valleys, and the Messenians who lived there were numerous. For 2 long wars, separated by decades, the Spartans fought with relentless cruelty to bring this land under their control. When the fighting was done, they had doubled the size of their territory and gained something even more important, an enslaved population that would sustain their way of life. The conquered Messenians became the Helots, a people bound to the soil, forced to farm for their Spartan masters. Every harvest, the Helots gave up half their produce, feeding not just the citizens of Sparta, but the very system that allowed those citizens to devote themselves entirely to war. Unlike household slaves in Athens or Corinth, Helots were not individuals but a subjugated nation, entire families chained to the land of their ancestors, living under the constant shadow of violence. For the Spartans, the Helots were both essential and dangerous. They outnumbered their masters by as much as 7-1, and the fear of revolt haunted the Spartan mind. To manage this, the Spartans developed a society of constant surveillance and intimidation. Every year, the ephors, Sparta's magistrates, declared war on the Helots, a legal ritual that allowed any Spartan citizen to kill a Helot without fear of blood guilt. Young men in training were even sent out in secret raids, a practice known as the krypteia, to hunt down any Helot who seemed too bold, too rebellious, too dangerous. But to justify such cruelty, the Spartans cloaked it in myth. They believed that the gods themselves had destined the Helots to serve, that this order of master and slave was part of the divine will handed down at Delphi. To them, enslaving an entire people was not just conquest, it was duty, ordained by Apollo and protected by Ares. And so, the Spartan citizen could live a life dedicated to war because others broke their backs in the fields. The phalanx of bronze and discipline, the warriors who would one day face down Persia, all of it rested on the suffering of those who could never escape. This uneasy balance would become the heartbeat of Sparta, a small elite ruling over a vast enslaved population, their greatness built on fear. And to keep that fear alive, they turned inward, raising their own children in a crucible of hardship that would become infamous throughout the Greek world. If Sparta's power rested on the conquest of the Helots, its endurance rested on something even harsher, the agoge, the state-run system that transformed boys into warriors. No other Greek city dared to raise its youth as Sparta did. At the age of 7, Spartan boys were taken from their families and placed into military barracks. From that moment forward, their lives belonged not to their parents, but to the state. They were organized into herds, sleeping side by side on reed mats, clothed in little more than a rough cloak, fed meager rations that left them constantly hungry. The hunger, however, was deliberate, a lesson in endurance and a test of cunning. They were encouraged to steal food to survive, but if caught, the punishment was severe. The lesson was not that stealing was wrong, but that getting caught was unforgivable. The story told by Plutarch, the philosopher, of a boy hiding a fox beneath his cloak captures the essence of Spartan education. When the animal began to claw and tear at his belly, the boy did not flinch or cry out for fear of discovery. He let the beast rip into him until he collapsed dead, having proven that silence and discipline mattered more than life itself. The agoge trained boys in wrestling, running, combat with spear and shield, but it was never just about physical strength. It demanded obedience, endurance, and absolute loyalty to the phalanx, the shield wall in which each man's survival depended on the one beside him. A coward was not simply a disgrace. He endangered the entire line. To falter was to betray Sparta. Life was stripped to its harshest essentials. Their meals were little more than the infamous black broth, a stew of pig's blood, vinegar, and salt, so revolting to outsiders that one Athenian is said to have joked, "Now I understand why Spartans are so fearless in battle. Death is better than dinner." But beneath the cruelty, the Spartans saw something sacred. The agoge was not simply training. It was preparation for serving Ares, the god of war, and for upholding the laws that Apollo himself was believed to have given them at Delphi. A Spartan warrior was not a free man in the way an Athenian was. He was an instrument of the gods, a weapon forged by fire and sharpened by pain. Even their currency was a reflection of this worldview. While Athens traded with silver coins stamped with owls, Sparta used massive, brittle iron bars, deliberately worthless outside their borders. Wealth, luxury, softness. These were dangers, not virtues. The Spartan ideal was simplicity, endurance, and a life lived for the collective, never the individual. By the time a boy reached his 20s, he was no longer just a man. He was a soldier, molded into the phalanx, ready to march, fight, and, if necessary, die. The agoge did not raise free thinkers or philosophers. It raised warriors whose very existence was a living myth, men who would come to embody Sparta's most enduring legend, the unbreakable soldier. In most of Greece, women were expected to remain indoors, silent and obedient, their lives confined to the loom and the household. But in Sparta, the role of women was startlingly different, so much so that other Greeks often ridiculed and feared them. Spartan women were raised with a purpose: to give birth to strong sons who would become warriors. Unlike in Athens, they were not hidden away. From an early age, girls trained in athletics, running, wrestling, even throwing the discus and javelin. This physical strength was not seen as unladylike, but essential. The belief was simple: only strong mothers could bear strong children. But their influence went far beyond childbirth. Spartan women were landowners in their own right, inheriting property when male relatives fell in war. Some estimates suggest that by the later classical period, they held as much as a third of all Spartan land. In a society where men spent their lives in barracks and campaigns, it was women who managed estates, oversaw slaves, and ensured the economy continued to function. Their boldness shocked outsiders. Other Greeks told stories of Spartan women speaking freely in public, mocking men, and ridiculing cowardice. When one foreign woman asked a Spartan why only Spartan women had such power over their men, she replied sharply, "Because we are the only women who give birth to men." These sayings, remembered for centuries, became legendary. Perhaps the most famous was told to departing warriors: "Come back with your shield, or on it." The message was clear: either return victorious or return dead, but never return dishonored. This was no idle threat. A Spartan mother who saw her son flee the phalanx would rather see him dead than disgraced. And here again, myth underpinned reality. Spartan women were often associated with divine figures, with Leto, mother of Apollo and Artemis, or with the warrior goddess Artemis Orthia, whose cult thrived in Sparta. At her altar, boys endured ritual whippings, a reflection of the same harsh endurance expected of all Spartans. The presence of Artemis Orthia in their culture reinforced the idea that both men and women shared in the city's destiny, bound to a higher purpose. This balance of roles made Sparta unlike any other polis. The men fought and died for the state, but the women preserved its spirit, raised its warriors, and guarded its honor. In a sense, they were the keepers of Spartan destiny. Without them, the warrior society could not endure. And yet, while women gave Sparta its backbone, it was the city's unique political system that kept everything in motion. The Spartans did not just shape themselves into warriors. They built a government that was as unusual as it was enduring. Where Athens experimented with democracy and Corinth thrived on trade, Sparta forged a system designed to preserve order at all costs. At the heart of it was their most famous oddity: two kings. Unlike other Greek polis, Sparta was ruled by dual monarchs from two different royal houses, the Agiads and the Eurypontids. Both claimed descent from Heracles, the greatest of heroes, whose strength and labors embodied Spartan ideals. In theory, the kings ruled together as equals, one often leading armies abroad while the other remained at home. In practice, this arrangement created tension, but it also reflected something essential about Sparta: the belief in balance, in splitting power so that no single man could dominate. But the kings were not supreme. Their power was hemmed in by other institutions. The Gerousia, a council of 28 elders over the age of 60, along with the two kings, acted as a guiding body, proposing laws and judging serious crimes. In a society that worshipped discipline and tradition, age itself was seen as a kind of divine authority. Even more powerful, however, were the ephors, 5 officials elected each year, drawn not from aristocracy, but from the citizen body. They oversaw the kings, supervised the agoge, managed foreign policy, and even had the authority to prosecute or depose a king. Their existence was a reminder that in Sparta, no individual, not even one claiming divine blood, was above the state. And at the foundation of it all was the great Retra, the Spartan constitution. According to legend, it was not crafted by mortal hands, but delivered by Apollo's oracle at Delphi. The lawgiver Lycurgus, perhaps a man, perhaps a myth, was said to have journeyed there to ask how Sparta should be ruled. The oracle's answer was a system that blended monarchy, oligarchy, and democracy into a single, unyielding order. To the Spartans, their laws were not just human conventions, they were sacred, a divine command that bound every citizen to obedience. The result was a state that prized stability above all else. Change was dangerous, innovation suspect. Even wealth was deliberately suppressed. Gold and silver were outlawed, replaced with unwieldy iron bars for currency. Luxury was discouraged, equality among citizens enforced. Everything about Spartan politics and law reinforced a single goal: the preservation of a disciplined warrior society. But while the system gave Sparta strength and unity, it also carried within it the seeds of fragility. Power divided could prevent tyranny, but it could also paralyze. A society that outlawed wealth might prevent decadence, but it could not stop inequality from creeping in. And while the state claimed divine sanction, the gods could be fickle. Still, as long as this system endured, it kept Sparta focused on its destiny: to be a nation of warriors, unmatched on the battlefield. If the agoge forged the Spartan warrior and the laws preserved their discipline, it was on the battlefield that Sparta revealed its true face. For centuries, no army in Greece could match the reputation of the Spartan phalanx. The phalanx was deceptively simple. Each soldier stood shoulder to shoulder, shield locked against shield, spear angled forward, creating a wall of bronze and wood. But what made the Spartans terrifying was not the formation itself, it was the discipline behind it. Where other Greek armies sometimes broke ranks in the chaos of war, Spartans drilled until unity became instinct. Each man was taught from boyhood that his shield was not for his own protection, but for the man beside him. To lose it was to betray the line. A coward might live, but he would return home in disgrace, stripped of his honor, and shunned by his people. Spartan warriors were not flashy. They fought without ornament or flourish, moving as one. To their enemies, they seemed less like men and more like a single, unstoppable machine. Ancient writers marveled at how they advanced in silence, not with shouts or boasts, but with grim resolve, as though guided by something greater than themselves. Their kings often led them in person. Before battle, sacrifices were made to the gods, especially Ares, patron of war, and the Dioscuri, whom Spartans believed fought invisibly at their side. To other Greeks, the Spartan army seemed to carry with it an aura of the divine, as though the gods themselves walked in their ranks. The Spartan uniform became iconic: the crimson cloak, meant to hide blood and strike fear; the lambda, emblazoned on their shields, marking them as men of Laconia. They polished their helmets to shine in the sun, creating a wall of bronze that glared down upon their enemies. Even their hair carried ritual significance. Before great battles, Spartan warriors combed and braided their long hair, a symbol of pride and defiance, as if to say, "We are ready to die, and we will die beautifully." Their discipline extended off the battlefield as well. They marched to the rhythm of flutes, an eerie, measured sound that kept their steps in perfect time. No matter the terror of combat, no matter the size of the enemy force, the Spartans held their line. This unyielding cohesion gave rise to their reputation as the best heavy infantry in Greece, and perhaps the entire ancient world. But what made them invincible also made them inflexible. The Spartan army excelled in pitched battle on open ground, where the phalanx could advance like an iron wall. Yet against irregular warfare, sieges, or naval battles, they were far less prepared. This rigidity would one day cost them dearly. For now, though, Sparta's warriors seemed unstoppable. Their training, their discipline, their belief in divine favor, all of it combined to create an army that even the mighty Persian Empire would come to fear. Hey everyone, before we continue, I've got some exciting news. My weekly video is now live on my new channel, Index Unknown. That's where I dive into the hidden side of history, the secrets, the theories, the conspiracies, the things they don't want you to know. The latest upload takes on the Philadelphia experiment, the story that a Navy ship in World War II was made invisible, teleported, and left its crew in horrifying conditions. Was it secret military tech, a case of mistaken identity, or a myth that got out of control? The link's below if you're interested. Check it out after this video. By the early 5th century BCE, Sparta's name already carried weight across Greece, but it was the clash with the Persian Empire that would define their legend. Persia was the superpower of the age, a vast empire stretching from modern-day Turkey to India, from the Black Sea to the Nile. Against such overwhelming might, the fractured Greek city-states seemed hopelessly outmatched. When Xerxes, the great king of Persia, marched into Greece with what ancient sources describe as an army of over 1 million men, though modern estimates put it closer to 100,000 or 200,000, panic gripped the Hellenic world. Many cities bent the knee, unwilling to risk annihilation, but not Sparta. The Spartans, however, were not free to act. It was the time of the Carnea festival, a sacred celebration of Apollo during which Spartan law forbade military campaigns. Religion and tradition bound them as tightly as their shields. Yet when appeals for aid reached them, they did what Spartans always did. They found a middle path. A token force would march north to delay the Persians until the festival ended. At its head would be their king, Leonidas, who claimed descent from Heracles. What followed would become one of the most retold battles in human history, the stand at Thermopylae, the Hot Gates. The pass was narrow, squeezed between mountains and sea. Here, the Persian advantage in numbers meant little. Leonidas brought with him not just 300 Spartan warriors, his royal guard, men chosen for having sons to carry on their bloodlines, but also several thousand allies, Thespians, Thebans, and other Greeks who shared in the defense. Still, the image that endures is of the 300, their scarlet cloaks vivid against the dust, their bronze shields locked in unbreakable formation. For 2 days, they held the pass. Waves of Persian infantry broke against the phalanx, their numbers unable to penetrate the disciplined wall of Spartan shields and spears. Even the elite Persian immortals, the king's chosen guard, could not force a breakthrough. Ancient accounts tell of Spartans mocking their foes in the midst of battle, coolly combing their long hair before the fight, and welcoming the enemy with grim humor. When told the Persians had so many archers that their arrows would block out the sun, one Spartan replied, "Then we shall fight in the shade." But betrayal would decide the battle. A local man named Ephialtes revealed to Xerxes a hidden mountain path that bypassed the pass. Surrounded on all sides, Leonidas released the bulk of his allies, choosing to remain with his 300, along with 700 Thespians who refused to leave. Together they fought to the last man. Leonidas fell, and his body was fought over like a prize, until at last the Persians claimed it. Historically, Thermopylae was a defeat. The Persian army swept south, burning Athens to the ground. Yet the sacrifice of Leonidas and his men became something far greater than a tactical battle. It was myth in the making, a story of men who chose death over surrender, of warriors who stood against impossible odds. Herodotus records that an oracle had foretold that Sparta must either lose a king or see the city destroyed. And so Leonidas fulfilled that prophecy. In death, he became immortal. For Greece, the stand at Thermopylae was a rallying cry. Within a year, at Salamis and Plataea, the Persian invasion would be turned back, and at the heart of that story, etched into memory, were the Spartans, remembered not for victory, but for sacrifice. But Persia was not the only rival Sparta would face. Their greatest struggle would come not from beyond Greece, but from within it. The defeat of Persia did not unite Greece for long. With the common enemy driven back across the Aegean, the city-states quickly returned to what they did best: competing, conspiring, and clashing for dominance. And no rivalry ran deeper than that between Sparta and Athens. On the surface, they could not have been more different. Sparta was a landlocked military camp, its people hardened by discipline, its culture suspicious of outsiders. Athens was a bustling port city, brimming with trade, ideas, and art. To Athens, freedom and individual expression were the lifeblood of civilization. To Sparta, freedom was dangerous, disorderly, a threat to the unity that kept them alive. In mythic terms, it was as though the two cities embodied the gods themselves. Athens under Athena, goddess of wisdom, strategy, and craft. Sparta under Ares, god of war, raw strength, and unyielding force. Each believed their way of life superior. Each saw themselves as chosen. Athens rose quickly after the Persian Wars, building the Delian League, an alliance of city-states that soon transformed into an empire. Tribute flowed into Athens, funding the Parthenon, its dazzling fleet, and its golden age of drama and philosophy. Sparta watched with growing unease. To them, Athens' power looked less like leadership and more like tyranny. Sparta answered by strengthening its own network. The Peloponnesian League, a coalition of allies bound to Sparta through military obligation. While Athens ruled the seas, Sparta commanded the land. For decades, the two circled one another, a rivalry simmering beneath every negotiation and every skirmish. The world took sides. For the Greeks, it was more than politics. It was a question of which vision of life would define them. Would Greece be an empire of trade and art, or a warrior state bound by discipline and fear? Tensions boiled over in 431 BCE, sparking the Peloponnesian War, a conflict that would last nearly 30 years. Athens, with its glittering walls and mighty fleet, seemed untouchable. Yet the Spartans had what Athens never could: soldiers who had been molded since childhood into perfect instruments of war. The clash was not immediate. It was a war of sieges, alliances, and betrayals. At times, Athens seemed to triumph. At others, Sparta pulled ahead. But beneath it all was a sense of inevitability. Only one vision could survive. And when the dust finally settled, it was Sparta that stood victorious, its warriors marching into Athens itself. For the first time, the proud city of Athena bowed its head to the sons of Heracles. Yet Sparta's triumph was not the beginning of an age of glory. It was the peak of a mountain. And from that peak, there was only one direction left to go. The long and bitter Peloponnesian War finally ended in 404 BCE. Athens, once the shining jewel of Greece, was broken. Its fleet lay at the bottom of the sea, its empire torn apart, its proud citizens starving behind walls that could no longer protect them. When the Spartans marched into the city and ordered the destruction of Athens' long walls, the fortifications that had once linked the city to its harbor, it was a symbolic act as much as a strategic one. The age of Athens was over. The age of Sparta had begun. For the first time, Sparta stood as the undisputed master of Greece. Their armies had crushed Athens on land, and, ironically, their newfound navy, built with Persian gold, had beaten Athens at sea. The Spartans, once landlocked warriors who scorned ships, now commanded fleets that sailed across the Aegean. It seemed nothing could rival them. Sparta imposed its will on the conquered cities, setting up pro-Spartan governments known as the Dicarches, councils of 10 men loyal to their interests. Most infamous of all was the 30 Tyrants, the brutal puppet regime installed in Athens. Though Spartan soldiers guaranteed their rule, the tyrants unleashed a reign of bloodshed that shocked even their allies. To many Greeks, Sparta's victory did not feel like liberation. It felt like domination. The warrior state that had claimed to fight for freedom against Athens' empire now demanded obedience in its own name. Whispers spread that the Spartans had betrayed Greece, trading one master for another. And yet, in the glow of their triumph, the Spartans mythologized themselves as instruments of divine justice. Just as Athena's city had fallen, so too had the goddess herself been humbled by the sons of Ares. To them, it was not merely politics, it was fate, a victory written in the will of the gods. But beneath the surface, cracks were already beginning to form. Spartan society was built on a delicate balance, a small elite of full citizens ruling over a vast sea of helots, their numbers always dwindling, their grip on power always fragile. Victory had given Sparta new responsibilities: garrisons to maintain, allies to control, lands to oversee. The warrior state that had once defined itself by discipline and simplicity now faced temptations it had long rejected: wealth, empire, and corruption. For a moment, Sparta seemed to stand like a colossus, feared and unchallenged. But history rarely allows such heights to last. The same system that had given them strength was now slowly hollowing them out. And soon, a rival would rise, not from the sea like Athens, but from the land, carrying with it a new kind of army that would break Sparta's unshakable line. Sparta's triumph over Athens marked the peak of its power, but from that moment onward, decline was inevitable. The very system that had made Sparta strong was also eating it from within. The most pressing problem was simple: numbers. Full Spartan citizens, known as the Spartiates, were always few in number, and their way of life ensured they would never grow. Only those born of two Spartan parents, who survived the brutal trials of the agoge, and who could afford to contribute to the communal mess halls, were counted as true citizens. Everyone else, helots, perioikoi, or disenfranchised Spartans, was excluded. By the 4th century BCE, their numbers had dwindled so drastically that only a few thousand true Spartiates remained, guarding over tens of thousands of helots. The image of the invincible Spartan line began to look less like destiny and more like desperation. Wealth, too, corrupted them. Sparta had long outlawed gold and silver, relying on iron bars as currency to prevent greed. But after their victories, tribute and spoils poured in from across Greece and even from Persia. Spartans, who once prided themselves on equality and simplicity, now lived with wealth they were never meant to have. The balance Lycurgus had supposedly established, equality among citizens, discipline over luxury, began to unravel. The rich grew richer, the poor fell away from citizenship, and the tight core of Spartan warriors shrank further. And then came Thebes. In 371 BCE, at the Battle of Leuctra, the unthinkable happened. The Spartan army, long considered unbeatable in open battle, faced the Thebans under the brilliant general Epaminondas. The Thebans used a radical tactic: a deep phalanx, 50 men across and ranks upon ranks deep, smashing into the Spartan right wing where their best warriors, including one of their kings, stood. The Spartan line broke. For the first time in history, a Spartan king was slain in pitched battle, and the myth of Spartan invincibility was shattered. The defeat sent shockwaves across Greece. Cities that had once bowed to Spartan power now saw weakness and rose against them. The Thebans invaded the Peloponnese, even liberating Messenia, freeing the Helots who had sustained Sparta's economy for centuries. The very foundation of Spartan life crumbled. Some said it was divine punishment, the gods turning against Sparta for its arrogance. The myths that had once justified their dominance now seemed hollow. Once, the sons of Heracles had marched with Ares at their side. Now they were abandoned, brought low by hubris. Sparta remained a city, but it was never the same. No longer the dominant power, it became a shadow of itself. Still proud, still disciplined, but living more on reputation than reality. The Iron Men of Greece had been broken, not just by their enemies, but by the weight of their own contradictions. By the time Rome rose to power, Sparta was no longer the terror of Greece. Its armies had been humbled, its empire stripped away, and its helots freed. What remained was a proud but hollow city, one that lived more in memory than in reality. Yet the Romans were fascinated by Sparta. To them, the Spartans were not a defeated people, but living relics of an age when discipline and courage had ruled the battlefield. Visitors came to Laconia to see what had once been the training ground of the greatest warriors of Greece. What they found was not an empire, but a city playing at its former glory. Sparta adapted by turning its past into spectacle. Rituals once meant to harden boys into men were transformed into public performances. At the temple of Artemis Orthia, Spartan youths were still whipped in brutal rites, but now it was not for training or sacrifice. It was for the entertainment of Roman audiences who watched, awed, and horrified. Tourists marveled at what they believed was the survival of an ancient, unbroken tradition, though in truth, it was a shadow of the agoge that had once shaped Spartan warriors. Roman writers held up Sparta as a model of lost virtue. They praised its austerity, its courage, its rejection of luxury, even as the Spartans themselves no longer lived that way. For the Romans, Sparta was a myth made flesh, a city that embodied values they longed to see in their own legions. But for the Spartans themselves, it was a strange fate, to become an exhibit of what they had once been, warriors preserved in memory but powerless in reality. Even so, the legend endured. Leonidas and the 300 were remembered as martyrs of freedom. The sayings of Spartan women were retold like scripture. The phalanx, the crimson cloaks, the discipline of the agoge, all of it outlived the real city, which slowly faded into obscurity under Roman rule. Sparta was no longer a power, no longer a threat, but as long as men told stories of courage and sacrifice, the Spartans could never truly die.